The Total Screen proudly presents their official podcast, On Screen, with your hosts, Tyson Gifford and William Rohrig.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to On Screen, the official podcast of the Total Screen. My name is Tyson.
My name is Will.
And today we are going to be talking about Marvel's Echo, the 5-episode limited series that dropped on Disney Plus and Hulu earlier this year. We're going to be talking about that. We also have some stuff on the horizon coming up and some trailers to talk about in our On Beat segment. Let's kick things off with On the Horizon.
On the horizon. On the horizon.
On the Horizon is where we talk about stuff coming up in the next week or so. And we only got two things really notable coming up this week. So first up, The Daily Show is coming back on Monday, February 12th on Comedy Central. Normally we wouldn't add this to our On the Horizon segment except for one interesting tidbit. And that is that Jon Stewart is returning for The Daily Show. Only on Mondays, but he's returning for The Daily Show through the election cycle. And that's starting on Monday, February 12th.
Really cool.
Yeah. And then the other thing is something that's more dread than look forward to, and that is Madam Web is coming out on Wednesday, February 14th in movie theaters. And we reacted to the trailer a while ago, and it was garbage. So
yeah, it looks like feature-length CW movie. I don't know.
It looks like what I've come to expect from Sony's Marvel stuff.
Yeah.
Which is very unfortunate.
Just cheap and stupid.
Yep.
It's like, yeah.
Yeah. So that is it for our On the Horizon segment. And now we're moving on to On Beat.
On Beat.
On Beat is our new segment, and today we're just going to be talking about, we got 6 trailers that came out in the past 2 weeks because we didn't podcast last week. I don't know if I didn't mention or anything, but I was moving. That's why we didn't podcast last week. But this week we have some trailers to talk about that came out over the course of the past 2 weeks. And some good ones in there, some interesting ones in there. I'm going to start things off with Roadhouse. This is a remake of the Patrick Swayze movie, which you told me that you hadn't seen. I think it's a good action movie. It's of its time. It's definitely got some cheese to it, but it's just a fun, good, rowdy action movie. And this remake looks pretty interesting. I think the thing that's weird about it is that I guess it's coming straight to Amazon Prime or something, and the director is not happy.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird because, like, it does look like a movie that should be in theaters. I don't know.
Jake Gyllenhaal, yeah, you know?
Yeah, it does not look like a straight-to-streaming film, which is, like a compliment because, like, you can identify. The movie, it's interesting because there's another movie coming to Amazon Prime, Ricky Stenicki, that definitely looks like a streaming movie. And the difference is staggering to me because we used to have these things straight to DVD with low budget movies that would just not get theatrical release. They go straight to DVD. Now it's straight to streaming. That's been replaced with streaming services. And watching the trailer for Roadhouse, this does not look like a movie that was made for cheap or was made to be sent to a streaming service.
Well, it's weird. The stuff that's like comes out straight to streaming is all over the map. Like sometimes it's like, oh, this would be like an Oscar contender if it wasn't a streaming movie.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's like you watch it and you're like, wow, this is like a really good action movie that would have been like a summer blockbuster if this wasn't a streaming movie. I don't know why it's on streaming. And then you get other stuff and it's like, yeah, this is like a goofball comedy. And now I can understand why it came to streaming because that genre in theaters is like dead. Like we used to have, Old School and The Hangover and stuff like that. And we don't really get that anymore. So I understand that that's just, that genre is kind of dead in theaters.
Yeah.
So that's all straight to streaming. And then then we still get the stuff that, you know, most of the straight to streaming stuff, actually, I think, is like the really bad stuff that used to be straight to DVD or straight to video that you mentioned, you know? The kind of stuff you would see on like the bargain shelf at like Blockbuster Video or something, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, do you remember when they were trying to make all of like those copies of like major movies and they did like a copy of Thor? Because Marvel owned Thor as he is in the comic books, but all that's based on like Norse mythology. So somebody else was basically able to copy the entire fucking premise. And Loki was played by like Richard Grieco or something. And like,
that's a silent movie. It's funny too, because when you talk about that, for a long time, like Netflix's bread and butter was like asylum films. Let's be honest. In the early days.
Well, it's how they filled out their library, you know? It's how they did that. And they started, a lot of Netflix's practices that are still kind of interesting that they do, like stem from that. Like, not from the asylum thing in specifically, but from their need to like fill out a catalog. Like, they did this thing that they still do that's become a characteristic of Netflix, which is that they don't just have like a single image that represents like a series. They'll have like 5 different posters or whatever. And so like when you look at like, oh, there's a show or something, sometimes you'll see something and you're like, oh, what's this show? And then you realize, oh, it's something I already watched. It's just a different cover version or something.
Yeah.
That they put up. And Netflix started that shit because they just needed to, they would have so many repeats in the different categories of different movies. And they did that so that it didn't look like it was the same thing over and over.
Yeah. They tried to create an illusion that they had a bigger library. Yeah, but I mean, that's Roadhouse. It looks good.
It looks like a competent, fun action movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next up, we got a trailer for Monkey Man. Now, apparently, this was originally going to be a straight-to-streaming movie.
Yeah.
I think it was Netflix, and then Jordan Peele saw it and was like, no.
Yeah, I was like, no, this is getting a theatrical release. Which, good on him, because it looks fantastic.
It's also crazy. I think this is Dev Patel's directorial debut.
Oh, okay.
He directed this, and he's the main star in this, and, you know, I followed his career. I watched him when he was on Skins back in the day, and then Slumdog Millionaire, and then The Green Knight. You know, I followed his career through all these ups and downs, and now he's not only kind of taken like the John Wick style movie approach where he's like a new action star, but he's also directed it. So that's really
exactly.
cool.
Yeah, that is really cool.
And the movie looks great. I mean, I mentioned John Wick. It very much feels like a Indian John Wick movie, you know? It has that kind of vibe of like, you know, just frenetic, quick action, really stylistic, mythos about the city they're in and everything that's going on. It looks really cool. Next up, we got a trailer for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Now, we saw this before. We've seen the trailers, I think one tease and one trailer for this movie before that, and we reacted to it and mentioned it. But we're starting to get like a lot more being shown now. And not only are we getting more being shown, but like stuff's come out and like interviews and discussions and stuff about the movie that's been kind of interesting. I think you pointed out to me this thing about how they're basing the story on like the kind of stories they would do for the Ghostbusters animated series, the real Ghostbusters.
Yeah, they've said like this movie is heavily based on the real Ghostbusters animated series and like the style of like story and stuff that they want to tell. It's got the weird villain. It's got Slimer. You know, it's got like all these references that are specifically, they basically said like, yeah, this is basically a feature like live action, episode of the animated series.
Yeah. I loved the animated series.
Oh, same. I loved it. That was like my main like contact with the Ghostbusters franchise. Like, I mean, I watched the movies. I went to the theater to see part 2. I think part 1 like came out when I was an infant. So, but you know, I went back, I watched that, but like my mainline dose of Ghostbusters was the cartoon like every afternoon. That and the toys, which the toys were very blatantly based off of the cartoon anyway. So, you know, yeah.
I remember watching an episode and being really hooked in the episode, and I was at a family friend's house, and my mom came to pick me up, and she was like, oh, you gotta go now, or something, and I was so pissed. Because, like, they basically forced me to leave before I finished the episode. And I was like, and this is, again, you know, we didn't have a VCR yet at this point. You couldn't really rely on reruns for Saturday morning cartoons. You didn't know when you were going to see them again. So it was just like, that was I never saw the rest of that episode.
Oh, so you never got to see that episode again. Rip.
Yeah, barely remember enough about it now to like figure it out, but I remember being so angry.
It's funny
Ghostbusters
'cause,
Frozen Empire coming out.
you know what? It looks good. I'm going to say it looks good. I wasn't sold on Afterlife. I still haven't watched it. I wasn't sold on Afterlife, but like this looks proper Ghostbusters.
Afterlife was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I gotta watch it. I haven't watched it yet, and I'm excited for this. I'm gonna be honest.
Next up, we got a trailer for The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Starring
This
Henry
looks
Cavill.
fantastic. Yeah, Henry Cavill. I believe this is Guy Ritchie directing.
Yes.
It looks like classic Guy Ritchie. Like you can't
Yeah.
mistake it.
Yeah, Guy Ritchie's been kind of on a hit or miss stint for a while.
This kind of
Some
looks
stuff
like
has
it's
been
going
not
back
that
to
great,
like
some's better.
yeah, like his Aladdin remake sucked. Sorry. But no, it looks like it's going back to like the style of his hits, like Snatch, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, that kind of style.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a lot of fun. It's like, yeah, based on a true story. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure, but like, that's really like a lot of this looks like heightened reality stuff. Like,
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of, I listened to this whole podcast about this like insane plot that actually worked in World War II, where they like leaked fake information to the Germans, and they did it through like, by having this like dead body that they used to like wash up on shore with the information. And they did all this stuff to like make this plan. It was like ridiculous, the amount of work that went into it. And the people that were literally involved in this plot included like Ian Fleming, the author of the James Bond books.
oh, that's
was
awesome.
like one of the people involved in this plot and stuff. And they made a movie about it, like a Netflix movie. It kind of reminds me of like that, the kind of idea of just like a totally audacious scheme being, you know, pulled off in like World War II, basically.
Yeah. It looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah. Next, we got a just insane trailer for a movie called The Invisible Fight.
Yeah. I have no idea. Like, it's like about this dude who wants to like become a monk and he wants to learn kung fu.
Yeah. He's like in Russia. And
Yeah,
he
in
wants to
Russia.
become like a Russian monk, but so he can learn kung fu, which, you know, Russian monks don't do kung fu, but okay.
Yeah. And apparently, like, he's also like into heavy metal, like black metal.
Yeah.
Because he mentions that at like 1.2. And it looks completely like tripped out.
It looks batshit crazy. It looks like a lot of fun.
Yes, it does.
This is kind of our weird pick that we put up here, you know, for people that
I don't
listen
like-
to us to look this up. The Invisible Fight. Look up the trailer for The Invisible
Yeah,
Fight.
just look up the trailer, watch it. I don't really know how to describe it. It's the kind of thing that I'm really like, huh?
Yeah.
What? This? And then
Yeah.
you're like, oh, and then you're like, it could be interesting. That's my reactions to the trailer.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't know how to describe it.
And then lastly, we got a trailer for House of Ninjas, which I remember, I think we might have mentioned this in the news like a long time ago when this was like first being made. Because I remember it was like weird. There was like some like Western writer and showrunner being involved in it, but it was like
Yeah.
set in Japan, in Japanese, with a fully Japanese cast about about ninjas.
Yeah, it's funny because like I was watching this trailer and like, yeah, it's about ninjas in Japan, Japanese family, full Japanese cast. And that's a writer director, and it's like some American dude's name. Like, oh, it's like Dan something. I'm like, what? Really?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I remember us like going over this news. I don't even know if he reported it or if he just like went over, talked about whether or not we were going to report it. But I remember going over the news on this and it being a little bit weird, but like kind of interesting. And now we got a trailer for it, and it looks like a really cool ninja series.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to it. It looks like
It's
several anime that I've watched rolled into one, but live action.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's going to be a good time, so I'm looking forward to that series coming out. And that is it for trailers and our On Beat section, and that leaves only full spoilers. This week on Full Spoilers, we are talking about Echo, the limited MCU Marvel series, the first of the Marvel Spotlight branding series to come out on both Disney Plus and Hulu simultaneously, and they also dropped all of the episodes at the same time, which was they hadn't done before with the Disney Plus property.
No, this is new.
Yeah, so there's a lot of new things they were doing here. Echo, it's a continuation of Hawkeye, which we had watched before. The character debuted in there. Her conflict conflict with Kingpin, all that started in Hawkeye. We get to see kind of her story now. It's only 5 episodes. It's short. And it's also at the same time, this was promising to be like a return to Netflix Marvel.
Yeah. Like
And I think no matter what you say, I think it actually is a return to Netflix Marvel.
Well, it's trying.
But the important thing is that that's not always necessarily a good thing, because not everything Netflix Marvel was good.
Because a lot of Netflix Marvel was actually awful.
Yeah.
So,
The Defenders, Iron Fist, you know?
Yeah.
Much of Luke Cage.
I will say, like, it still stands after this podcast. Iron Fist Season 1 is still the worst thing to ever come out of Marvel. I don't care what anybody says.
I'd say this is probably better than either season of Iron Fist or The Defenders.
I mean, that's fair.
Yeah. Probably not as good as Luke Cage.
No.
And definitely not on the same scale as Daredevil, Jessica Jones, or The Punisher, which were the standouts in Netflix Marvel.
Yeah, exactly.
But at least tonally, like we talked about this before we started the podcast. We kind of should have saved all that for the podcast, but we talked about it before the podcast, and we both are in agreement that it's not a great series, but it started out as a great series. It started out really promising.
Had a
really
strong
good.
beginning. Well, the second episode, like, or maybe like the end of the first episode, because most of the first episode is just like basically like recap and like flashback. It's kind of like it takes you from when Maya was a child and her relationships and what happens with her mother, and then like through like her being taken in by the Kingpin, and then through that we get like a bunch of recaps from Hawkeye, the Hawkeye series. Mm-hmm. And then we get to the present day pretty much by the end of the episode.
Yeah. It's a lot of it's recap, but a lot of it's stuff we're seeing that we hadn't seen before. So it's recap. Yeah. It's recapping her life up to that point, but most of that we hadn't seen. So like most of it is not just recap from Hawkeye. That's just like the big key events, like her father dying and her turning on the Kingpin and all that kind of stuff. That's all like the major events from Hawkeye that it touches on. But we're seeing a lot of stuff from like her days growing up with her family in Oklahoma, with her tribe and everything that happens with them. There's stuff that we get about her and Kingpin in her past that wasn't in Hawkeye that we're getting for the first time here as well. So it's like new flashback material. There's a lot of that and stuff. I thought it was a good episode. Yeah, it is very recappy, but it also is like there's a lot of new stuff in there too. So it made it good for me. And the second episode was strong too. And what we were talking about before we started the podcast here when we were talking about the show is that it's kind of ruined by its own Marvelness or by its own like drive to make like it's pushed to try to like make it accessible or to make it like something that like more people would enjoy. It's what hurts the show.
Yeah, what hurts the show is its need to be like a Marvel thing, right? It's its need to like, we're introducing like a new superhero and
we didn't need superpowers.
No, we did not need superpowers.
We didn't even need necessarily a real antagonist besides the flashbacks.
Yeah.
For this. Like it was just a wasted story, you know?
I gotta say, yeah, those to me were like the two biggest like weaknesses of this was like the whole thing like with her powers, like I like the idea that she gets strength from her ancestors. I think that's solid, but the way like they went about it was like goofy because like her hands glow and then she just gets whatever random power she needs in the situation. Like it just seems like she could just do random shit. Like she has super strength at one point, at the other point like she's like mind bending like the Kingpin. It's never like clearly defined, what she can or can't do.
Yeah,
like it just sucks all the energy out of everything when it happens. That scene in the last episode, her showdown with the Kingpin, where, she's got her family, like, that's a tense scene up until the point, like, everybody's hands glow and they got, like, fucking superpowers, and then, like, all the tension of, like, that situation goes whoosh out the window.
Yeah.
And the scene's ruined. It's ruined from that point.
This is very similar. If you've listened to us discuss MCU stuff before, you probably remember when we talked about Ms. Marvel. And it's very similar to that. And that I think you and I both praised Ms. Marvel for like having like really interesting characters with the family. And the family dynamics were interesting. And neither of us knew really anything about the partition and like what that meant in like Pakistan and stuff. And so it's like all of that stuff. Very very interesting to touch on, to go into the partition stories, to go into what it means to be, of that culture in America, in New York, and all of those things were fascinating. Even just like the aspects of Ms. Marvel being like the super fan of like the superheroes, especially Captain Marvel and stuff. All of that was interesting. The way they even did like her drawings coming to life, and like the way they kind of like did visually presented in like the early episodes. All of that was really, really good and super strong and made us excited about what the rest of the show was going to be. And then they said, okay, we need to put a big antagonist in here and we need to tie that into the story. And then they said, oh, and we have this damage control thing. We need to bring them in, but we need to make them like mustache trolley villains. And
we need to make them goofy as hell, and so that you can't ever like take those characters seriously. Why?
Yeah, we didn't need any of that. We didn't need stakes in Ms. Marvel at all. Like what we should have had with Ms. Marvel is we should have had a story about a Muslim American girl in high school. She suddenly comes into these powers. She's trying to figure them out, and she's trying to like become a superhero, but it's all small time stuff. In the meantime, damage control, not as they are in the actual show, but damage control or some group of some sort is trying to figure out who she is.
Yeah.
But they're not doing it in a mustache trolley like all heroes must be in prison sort of way, but more in like she's doing something dangerous and she shouldn't be kind of way. More like in a responsible way, as she's also dealing with her family dynamics. And that should have been it. We didn't need the story about the djinn and the multidimensional stuff. We didn't need the time travel, even though like the parts of that episode were interesting with the partition story aspects of that episode and stuff were interesting. It wasn't necessary for the plot of this show, like, and that's kind of how we felt, I think, about Ms. Marvel. Like both of us kind of, I think when we were talking about it, we're kind of similar in that thing is that we ended up not liking the show, even though we really liked the characters and we really liked the main central stuff that we were getting in like the first episode. Like we were like into all of that. And then the show just like fell apart because it was trying too hard to be a Marvel show. And it's like, you don't necessarily have to do all that shit, like we don't necessarily need like a primary antagonist or something even. Like you can have conflict without having a major antagonist, we don't need any of that stuff. Like none of that was necessary. And it's this exact same thing with Echo.
Yeah.
It's like she's deaf, and they found interesting ways to play with that and to show kind of like how she experiences things. All that stuff's very cool.
Yeah,
she's Native American. She's from the Choctaw tribe. It's like very interesting. All of that stuff, very cool. She's got her family members that she hasn't seen because there was a bad falling apart when her mom died, and when they got separated from that and her dad, and there's kind of some resentment, but there's also some love in the family there. All of that, great. Why couldn't we have just had that? Why did they have to they could have just had all the Kingpin stuff could have just been in flashbacks. All the other stuff could have just been family drama, and that's it. No armed gunmen coming to ruin the powwow. None of that shit. We didn't need any of that.
Well, aside from the Kingpin.
I think they could have even left Kingpin in the backstory.
No. Let me finish talking, please.
Okay.
I mean, aside from the Kingpin, Vincent D'Onofrio was awesome. All the villains in this were just crap. They were just goons, and there was there's no suspense from it because there's a scene where those people take over the rolling skate rink and they're holding the people inside hostage, including Maya. But at that point, Maya has her powers and stuff, and also her skill set. And these are just small, these are just goons, small-time criminals. So it's kind of she's gonna kick their ass and save the day. Where's the tension in this situation? Where's the give? It seems kind of pointless.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We just didn't need any of that. And it's Kingpin is, Vincent D'Onofrio is always great as Kingpin. He's great in it. It would have been better if he was just in flashbacks. We didn't need present day Kingpin Maya stuff like that. We didn't even need that.
Right.
The story should have just been about her finding out who she is now. Because Maya's life, she started out, she was part of this family, this tribe. Everything was about that. Then, her mom died. Her father was blamed for it. She had to move away. Her dad got involved with, Kingpin, all that stuff. He got involved in organized crime. And that started influencing her life. And then she grew up and went into that lifestyle. Then her dad died. And now her life is about getting revenge. Then in Hawkeye, the resolution to that was Hawkeye having a conversation to her where he breaks down, hey, it's Kingpin you should be after, not me. He's the one that wanted your dad dead. Who do you think gave me his name? And does all that stuff and causes her to go like, whoa, now like my entire life is turned upside down. That's what this show should have been about. It should have been about her coming to terms with who she is now.
Yeah.
And we didn't need her to become a hero to have a big epic fight scene. Like, it would have been best if it ended with her deciding that that's what she was going to do. We didn't even have to see it. Just her going like, I'm going to go back to New York and I'm going to, fight or something like that. And that could have been the end of the series and it would have been a good ending. But instead, it's like, no, we have to bring Kingpin back in and stuff. We have to have him here in the present day with it. All of that cheapened Kingpin. It made him less interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, you didn't need to do that
also,
at all.
Her family was great. Obviously, all the actors did a fantastic job with it, but they didn't get, it's weird because they also, seem sidelined from the plot. They didn't, get a lot to do either.
They're, instantly likable. Like Biscuits, her cousin that comes in, it's like the first person she meets up with again, Instantly likable, instantly fun. He gets right in with her adventures, and it's like, okay, this is cool. This is fun. Then he just basically disappears for the rest of the show until, the last episode.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't do anything.
She's got this other cousin or something, this girl that they keep showing in her flashback scenes that she's so important to her and stuff.
Yeah, flashback scenes, she comes back and she doesn't want to know she's back in town. That's her strongest relationship there is with her cousin. And she doesn't want her getting hurt, by her coming back and leaving, I guess. They
argue and banter about it a little bit and then it's over.
Yeah. It's over. And then she doesn't really play much of a role going forward.
I think Black Crow's the guy who owns the roller skate rink. I think he's a little bit more interested. They were able to do a little bit more with her, which made him a fun character to follow. But then you have her grandparents.
Yeah.
And it's again, her grandfather, he's just kind of a fun character that you have around. Nothing really happens there. He doesn't go through a journey or anything. It's he's just there. He's a good character and he's just there. The grandmother basically kicked Maya out of her life. Should have had a huge emotional conflict between them. It just pitted out to nothing.
It just ended up in an exposition dump of her grandmother further explaining to Maya and the audience basically Maya's powers and where they come from.
Yeah, without ever addressing the bad blood between them and what happened.
No. Shit, we gotta start explaining Maya's powers. We'll just have the grandmother do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so disappointing.
So instead of a emotional reconciliation, that never happens in this. Yeah. It's the bad blood is forgotten about basically.
Yeah, it's really frustrating because it's there was the skeleton of a great show here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. There's some fantastic stuff here. And also I feel it also feels there was a longer story that this was meant to be that was just shoved into five 40-minute episodes for no reason.
Yeah. I mean, they could have even kept it 5 episodes if they'd cut out all the fucking bullshit that we talked about that wasn't necessary,
It seemed to me they were writing a show for 13 episodes or even more, and at some point Marvel and Disney said, yeah, we're only giving you this much time, so try to condense that down, and they tried to keep as much of what they wanted in it while trying to condense it, and it just comes out weird and uneven.
Yeah. It's just this weird issue that Marvel's had, especially with some of the TV properties. I mean, so many of them, they just seem so promising, and then you get them and they're oh god, this is just bad. I mean,
yeah,
Secret Invasion,
Yeah, it makes you question, what the hell's going on over there?
Hawkeye was a weird, disjointed clusterfuck of tones. It was just never the same tone. It would be I'm kind of getting into Hawkeye. It's kind of funny and a little quirky and weird, and then it would take itself too seriously. And it's okay, now it doesn't match that anymore. It doesn't work that way anymore. It was all over the place. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with Marvel right now. You know, we were such huge Marvel fans when people were already bitching very early about Marvel when they were getting their Marvel fatigue. We were pretty ardent defenders of what Marvel was doing because I think a lot of the stuff that they were even criticized for doing is stuff they kind of had to do to like rebuild their universe after the events of Endgame and stuff. But it's like they've had so many misses now.
Yeah.
And it's like, getting frustrating.
It's getting very frustrating.
Like people are getting frustrated with like WandaVision. I fucking loved WandaVision, you know? And there are aspects of this in WandaVision too, where like they forced in a big CG battle that wasn't really necessary. I get that. And those were like the worst parts of WandaVision.
They did the same thing in Secret Invasion. They ended it with a big CG Super Skrull battle that was completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
And looked stupid and was stupid to boot. Like, like.
It's frustrating. I don't know what's going on there. I'm hoping they get their house in order, you know?
Same.
And it's hurt some of the movies too. The same kind of stuff is carried over into like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
I want the next thing I watch from Marvel to be something I love. Can that please happen?
Yeah, I mean, hey, the next Marvel movie at least, the next MCU, I should say, because the next Marvel movie is Madam Web. But the next MCU movie is Deadpool 3.
That should be something I love. Based off the first two Deadpool movies, so hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yep. So I guess that brings us to an end of our discussion of Echo and our full spoiler segment. And that's it for the rest of the week. Next week, we don't really have any plans yet for what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to have to figure that out. We've only done this a few times where we haven't given you guys a heads up about what we're going to discuss because we just don't know yet. But we'll figure it out and we'll have something to talk about next week. Until then, you can follow me on Twitter. I am at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our website, thetotaliscreen.com. If you go to our website and scroll down and find any of our container stories for our podcast episodes, open up one of those links. You'll find in that container story all of the links you need to our SoundCloud page, our Twitter accounts, our Facebook page, everything. It's all there. You can find everything there. So go wild. You can also subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcast finder of choice like Apple Podcasts or Pocket Casts. And the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel. So thank you everybody for listening. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to the OnScreen podcast, the official podcast of The Total Screen. Visit our website at thetotalscreen.com. This podcast can be found on any major podcast client, including Pocket Cast and Apple Podcast. The entire backlog of this podcast and other content can be found on our YouTube channel.